Hey guys, if you're interested in checking out a video version of the show, please visit the LOWKEY Geek channel on YouTube. There you can not only catch the video version of the podcast, but you can also check out my other projects and short form video that I produce. You can find a link in the description. Otherwise, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
One thing I don't really understand about this movie and I really find hilarious is why does everyone look wet? Like everyone is just sweaty. It seems like every other scene, everyone is just drenched in sweat. You got this guy who's sweaty, this guy yelling at this other guy because he's all sweaty. You see sometimes in the background you got fans going around, but that's not helping at all. And I know this was in the 80s, but haven't they invented air conditioning already at this time? I mean, I don't really remember. I mean, it's so long ago, but I just never understood why everyone's so sweaty. And don't get me started with that volleyball scene. First of all, who plays volleyball in jeans? Like really tight jeans, and everyone of course is so shirtless, and of course they're all sweaty, and I guess this is because it's something enticing for the ladies, right? I mean, look at them, chiseled bodies and sweaty and doing manly things and This is Top Gun Revisited. All right, so obviously we got the new Top Gun Maverick movie coming out, and I thought it would be kind of cool to revisit the original Top Gun. I am a kid of the 80s, and I grew up in the 80s, and this is definitely one of those quintessential 80s types of movies. I saw it very young. I was 8 years old at the time. And it came out in 1986. So 1986 was an interesting year for movies because obviously there were a good amount of kind of action movies based around some sort of war, right? Obviously we're in the 80s. Communism is like a big thing. And, we're in the Reagan era. So there's always, initiatives and talks about bringing down communism and the Iron Curtain and all that stuff like that. So beginning of the year in January, we had Iron Eagle that first came out, and this was a movie based on the Air Force, and you got good old Chappie, do it for Chappie, with Louis Gossett Jr. there, and it was a really fun movie. February we got the Delta Force, Chuck Norris and a bunch of other known vets in that movie, and I remember loving that movie. Great soundtrack and all that, And then Top Gun came out in May, right? And later on in the year, we got Platoon. So what was really interesting about Top Gun that kind of made it very different from those other movies is that the movie wasn't really based on any particular war. It's a movie where you got a bunch of dudes hanging out at a school. They're all going to school and they're all training in the Top Gun program because they are like the 1% of the best pilots in the Navy. These are Navy pilots, not to be confused with Air Force pilots, which is something, of course, that most people didn't really realize at the time, including myself. So 8 years old, 1986. I actually saw this movie in the theaters. Now, of course, a lot of you would probably think like, "Oh, aren't you a little bit too young to watch something like this?" Well, there wasn't really that much sex in it, right? And the violence in it was nothing. There was like no violence whatsoever. Correct me if I'm wrong. This might have been rated PG at the time. But I remember going to watch this in the theater, but unbeknownst to me and my mom and my mom's friend, or maybe they knew and I just didn't know, but it was a test screening. So the movie wasn't even officially out yet. We went to this theater in New Jersey. Of course, I live in New York. And, this place in New Jersey is where we used to go watch movies all the time, almost every weekend. And I guess somehow we were able to get into this test screening. And the reason why I remember that is because after the movie, everyone was handed surveys, paper surveys, and we had to fill in our answers to the questions that they were asking for the survey. And they were pretty much polling what we thought of certain things in the movie, what we thought of the soundtrack, what we thought of the actors and the actresses, and all that stuff. And they still do test screenings now. But it was so interesting to be involved in that process, especially at 8 years old, where most of the time I really didn't know how to answer any of these things there. But at 8 years old, I remember really loving this movie, mainly because obviously of the flight scenes. Anytime air combat was on screen, I loved this movie to death. And it was, it was just something that was really catered perfectly for a boy at that age. Especially with how the movie started. The movie started and all they had were just scenes of aircrafts, launching and lifting off the aircraft carrier and all that stuff. And they put you right into the thick of things early on. You see they're kind of doing like a protect mission in the very beginning. And you immediately have Tom Cruise and Goose there and, everyone else flying, trying to protect, whatever they're supposed to protect. And you already have an incident, right? But it's so funny because it's been a while since I've seen this movie. And it was so interesting because I remember at the time, I didn't know anything about the story whatsoever. The story didn't really mean anything to me. All I cared about were the flight scenes, right? And of course, I've seen this movie later on as I got older. But I never really understood what the main purpose of the movie was. And that's mainly because there isn't really a main story plot that's worth fleshing out. It's a very simple, basic storyline where, like I said, you got a bunch of good pilots, one of which is kind of, recluse, hotshot pilot, chip on his shoulder and all that. And him and his bud gets accepted to this top flight program, even though there's a lot of hesitancy behind it. And, they're there to compete for who's going to win the Top Gun trophy and to train with the best of the best so that they could help protect their country and all that. Main character falls in love with an instructor. They got like a little love romance going on there. Best friend dies. Very sad situation. He loses his edge because of that. And then he, builds up the guts to get back into it. And then at the end, which is like the last 20 minutes of the movie, that's when you finally get a conflict, an actual real conflict. And, you have people going against, the enemy, which they never even mention what country we're fighting against. It's been applied that it's a communist country. Some say it's the Soviets. Some say it's some other country, right? But they never really tell you. It's kind of left for interpretation and all that. Later on, if you play the video games, it's obvious that, they call out the Soviets as the main, country that we're against and all that. And then they survive this encounter, and that's the end of the movie. Boom. You have what I love to call the grab a dick moment, where everyone is kind of cheering, like, yeah, we did it, yeah, blah blah blah, and everyone's just like, rah. And that's it. That's pretty much how the movie kind of ends, right? And then you have like a nice little reunion between student and teacher, and the romance kind of builds back up again, right? But watching this now at a much later stage in my life, I of course, obviously, I understand a lot more. They tell you in the very beginning, in the little subtext or whatever, the text that they have is like, Top Gun flight school, da 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 da. So if you weren't paying attention at the beginning of the movie, you have no idea that this is going to be a movie about a school, right? So it was really, really interesting to see all that. And then you have your intense beginning with a mission to kind of protect the ship that's been, disabled or what have you. And, they encounter the enemy country trying to check it out. And they're just trying to ward them off and all that. Now, one of the pilots, and there's a reason why I'm bringing this up. One of the pilots, they finish what they have to do, but he kind of loses his edge because he was getting tailed by one of the guys for a very long time. That he has a very hard time going back to base and landing his plane. And Tom Cruise as Maverick has to come in and kind of coax him and calm him down so that he could finally land the plane back on the aircraft carrier. Now, if you are a fan of video games at that time, you would, of course, would know the Nintendo, the original Nintendo, and one of the earlier games for the Nintendo that was published by Konami was Top Gun, licensed game based off of the movie. And if you played that game, one of the most intense and hardest thing about that game is landing your plane on the damn aircraft carrier. You had to account for your speed and your altitude and all that, and 9 times out of 10 you'll crash and burn. You know, at least that was my experience. But now it makes perfect sense why they included this on the video game, because that was pretty much the beginning of the freaking movie. And it just, I had just one of those epiphany moments where just like, oh wow, yeah, that makes total sense. So I thought that was really hilarious. But yeah, interesting stuff about this movie. I mean, it's an 80s movie. It's definitely like a bromance type of movie because of the intense, you know, camaraderie between the students and trying to figure out who's the best of the best. And of course, all the adrenaline you witness and you go through watching like the intense flight scenes, right? The air combats and all that. But other than that, there's really nothing that spectacular about this movie, which is really interesting. But it's very notable because, one, you have the lead actor, Tom Cruise, who is just about reaching that status of, wait a minute, there's something about this guy, right? Because he's coming off of movies like Legend and Risky Business. You know, Risky Business, I think, was one of those movies where it really attracted a lot of people about who this actor is, up-and-coming actor. Now, the movie itself, Risky Business, is not a movie that you would find being made today unless it was like a little small independent film, because it's basically a movie about a college kid who comes up with this scheme to basically create his own brothel and charge his fellow classmates and students money to sleep with hookers and prostitutes. And then he eventually falls in love with one of them. But this was such a movie that really attracted a lot of people, especially to Tom Cruise. And he started to become an idol, like a teen idol. If you watch Stranger Things, you even notice that. You know, you notice like they referencing Risky Business and all that. And at one of the Halloween parties, you see one of the lead actors dress up like Tom Cruise from Risky Business. So this was really starting the trajectory of Tom Cruise as a leading actor. And, you know, you fast forward all these years later, 36 years later, and look at where he is now, right? From an up-and-coming actor who was just a teen heartthrob and a good-looking dude on screen to someone who's pretty much considered to be nuts and doing all of his own stunts. But he's still a fantastic actor. You know, there's something that draws us to watching him on the big screen, right? And then you have his partner, I'm sorry, not Anthony Michael Hall. That's a totally different movie. Anthony Edwards. And at that time, he was pretty much basically better known for his role on the TV drama series Saint Elsewhere, I believe. It took place in a hospital, and I think Howie Mandel was on that show and everything like that. And he was always seen as kind of like a comic type of person. He also starred in Revenge of the Nerds as one of the main two characters in that movie. So he was always seen as like a comedic guy. And in this movie, he does kind of still play that type of role where he is kind of, you know, the comic relief, but he's also plays kind of the audience. He is basically the voice of reason, the more grounded person, because Maverick, you know, played by Tom Cruise, right, whose name was Pete Mitchell, right? He was just one of those, you know, hotshot, lone gunman type of guys, you know, just always filled with adrenaline, always thinks, you know, he knows what he's doing and everything like that. Even though they have such a deep connection and bromance, he always just thinks about himself, you know, and they made that very clear throughout the movie, which is very interesting. So when Goose dies, we, the audience, felt it. because he was us. He was kind of like the person that we could relate to the most. And of course, knowing how closely we're together, I mean, just how heartbreaking that whole thing was, for that. And that was definitely, even watching it now, that still hits home pretty badly. It's still a very touching moment because of that type of romance, right? You have Kelly McGillis as the main love interest and main actress here. And, she was okay. I didn't really, now watching it as an adult, I really didn't feel the chemistry work there. And obviously everything just happened way too quick. They meet at a bar and he flirts with her very aggressively, mind you. And of course, this is the 80s, to the fact where he's like going into the women's bathroom to kind of chase her down, finding out that she's an instructor, and she has this whole like, I don't date students because I'm an instructor. And, in the movie, you feel like she's definitely older than he is too. So this is a very stereotypical thing that happens in the 80s, where there's like that fetish of like the younger guy falling in love with the older lady. And added to the fact that she's like a teacher too. So there's like that authority thing, right? And then just in one day or one evening, all of a sudden she's like, oh, there's going to be trouble. There's going to be very complicated because I've fallen in love with you. And it just happens like that, right? So, I mean, it was interesting, and it is what it is. It's just one of those things you kind of just learn to accept, right? And then you have Val Kilmer, who plays like kind of his, rival, right? And if you've ever watched the documentary Val, it was a very, very interesting documentary. He talks a lot about his time filming Top Gun and how he was, basically competing with Tom Cruise for screen time, and he wanted the lead role and all this kind of stuff like that. But you have two very good-looking dudes here, and the acting, especially for the time, was pretty top notch. I even say I may think that Val Kilmer's acting was even better than Tom Cruise at this time in the movie, and you really believed, the camaraderie and the competition there and everything like that. In addition to all that, you do have a lot of several other actors that were very new to Hollywood at the time. You have Meg Ryan, who, fresh face, no one really knew much about her, right? So she's definitely new. And Tim Robbins. Tim Robbins is in this movie, and of course later on he becomes this bigger movie star, along with Meg Ryan became like the rom-com person of like the late 80s, 90s and all that. And then you have some vets in here. You have Michael Ironside, Tom Skerritt, which is great. James Token, who plays like the hard-nosed kind of, general and boss and all that kind of stuff. So it was very, very cool to like revisit all that and seeing these actors in such an earlier time, in their career. Because again, when I watched it originally, I don't know majority of these people, but as I get older and I watch more movies, I see them come up quite often, especially in the 80s. So really, really, it was fun to see it all over again. But it was just really, really interesting to see this movie later on in my life at an older age, and really realizing that watching it, I still like the movie a lot, but I do feel like it's mainly because of nostalgia. Like I said, the story is nothing to write home about. The acting, I will say though, is phenomenal. And the action scenes were really a lot of fun. They were really a lot of fun. I'm so curious how the action scenes are going to be now with the new movie, knowing how Tom Cruise was actually really in the damn jet as they're flying around and all that stuff, right? Plus, it's also going to be very, very interesting to see like the newer crop and see how they act alongside with Tom Cruise and everything. When this movie came out, definitely it was a big talk of the town. I even had a movie poster in my room. I got it actually from the test screening. They were handing them out. And people really loved this movie at the time. you can't talk about this movie without mentioning the soundtrack. The soundtrack was, you heard a song from this soundtrack on the radio all throughout 86, even sometimes bleeding into 87. Take My Breath Away, Danger Zone, even that song You Lost That Love and Feeling, that they played on the piano, or they played in the background as he's trying to woo Kelly McGillis, right? And they do like a karaoke thing, singing in front of her. But that, I just remember never not hearing any one of these songs on the radio at the time. And, the soundtrack is pretty legendary as one of those like legendary 80s soundtracks, movie soundtracks. And when you hear it, exactly, it kind of brings you back to that time in 86. And of course, during, watching the movie and all that stuff like that. So that was really, really, that's something that you have to talk about and you have to mention when revisiting this movie or when you're just talking about this movie in general. So it's a shorter movie compared to today's standards. I believe it clocks like an hour and a half, like around that time. And like I said, the majority of the movie takes place in a school. So it's like kind of those hangout movies and all that. Of course, everyone loves to talk about the volleyball scene, the infamous volleyball scene. So it's interesting how this movie, on the surface, is geared towards boys and guys, right? That's why I do consider this to be a bro-y type of movie. But since it primarily focuses on Tom Cruise and Val Kilmer, right, it does have enough stuff in here for the ladies as well. Again, Tom Cruise was a heartthrob, teen heartthrob at the time, right? Even though he was 23 at the time or 24 at the time. But a lot of younger women really started noticing and paying attention to Tom Cruise at this time. We didn't feel that same way, guys. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong or whatever, but we didn't feel that same way about Kelly McGillis. I mean, I thought she was okay. Watching it now, I still have that same feeling. Not saying that she's not attractive, but she didn't really do it for me at the time. But it's just interesting how that thing is. I think this movie and this franchise, because for a while after this movie came out, I think people were asking if we were ever going to get another movie. And I know for a very long time they were talking about doing a sequel, wanting to do another movie and everything. And obviously we're getting it now, but watching this movie, I realized that there are some missed opportunities about fleshing out these characters more. Because the one thing this movie doesn't do is that it doesn't really give you a lot of character building. Yeah, we kind of understand why Maverick, Pete Mitchell is the way he is, because we get little glimpse of insights about his character. His dad was a top Navy pilot, and the reason why Maverick is the way he is because he feels like he's chasing a ghost. His dad disappears on a mission mysteriously. It's confidential and classified, so no one really knows exactly what happens. But because he was like a legendary pilot, Maverick feels like he has this weight on his shoulder, that he has this ghost that he's always facing and chasing down, because he carries the name Mitchell. So he has to prove himself above and beyond, that he can be better than his father, right? And create a name for himself. And that's why he's kind of like this loose cannon, right? And then it sounds, you throughout the movie, you feel like, okay, it sounds like he's had no family. And that's how he gets really close with Goose. And, he even says so in the movie, like Goose is his family. He's the only family he has left. And that's what makes the death of Goose even more so heartbreaking, because now he's alone. And because of that, he loses his edge. He feels not worthy to fly again until he has this great conversation with Tom Skerritt, who very briefly mentions, and I feel like this was like kind of glanced over in the movie. He says, I knew your dad. I flew with him. I know exactly what happened, and here's what happened. Blah, 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 this and that went down, yada, yada, yada. And Pete was like, oh, I don't know why no one's ever told me this before. Well, there it is. Now you know. Okay, move on. I mean, if I was a kid and I just learned about the details and further details about my dad's disappearance and death, I would be like, oh my God, I'm so relieved. And, now everything makes sense. Not even any of that, which is so bizarre to me, that was the case. But in creating a potential sequel or follow-up to this movie, I feel like something that they could have done, and I don't know what they're going to do in this new movie, but we'll find out when it comes out, is dive deeper into Pete's father, right? Maybe they could have done like a prequel or something like that highlights Pete's father and how great of a pilot he was and all that stuff like that. And then at the end of this movie, which is kind of confusing, is, when they're done with their like little encounter, and again, this is like the last 20 minutes of the movie, and probably the best part of the movie is when they finally have their little skirmish with the opposing country. Maverick ends up back in the school, and he's packing himself up. And they're asking him, all right, so now that you're done and you did what you have to do and you graduated from Top Gun, what do you want to do now? And he's like, well, I'm thinking about being an instructor. Like, what? And you get a funny little moment. It's like, God help us and all that. Pete Mitchell, Maverick becoming an instructor. Oh my God. So what happened? When you see the trailers for the new movie, it sounds like he didn't want to be an instructor. So there must have been something that happened. I'm sure it's probably going to get further explained in the new movie or what have you. But I feel like there are a lot of opportunities that they could have taken to expand on the storyline here if they ever wanted to. But I do feel like there were a lot of people who were interested in seeing more adventures of Maverick and maybe some of the other pilots or what have you and all that. Like I said, watching it now, it is very, very interesting. I understand the movie a little bit more now, more so than I ever did before. And I still do feel like it is a fun movie. But I do also feel very strongly that the reason why that is because it's nostalgia. I'm living off of that nostalgia as remembering the time I saw this movie. It definitely brings back memories of the 80s, and the soundtrack is great. Seeing an early Tom Cruise, in the beginning of his career is just a lot of fun. And it was just Val Kilmer too, just seeing him very early on in his career, and basically seeing him acting around Tom Cruise. And like I said, maybe I'm crazy, but I do feel like Kilmer's performance in this movie is probably even better than Tom Cruise's is. But it definitely is an interesting and fun movie to watch. Very interested to see how the new movie is going to turn out. But it was fun. It was fun revisiting this movie and going back to, strolling back down memory lane on Top Gun. So, I mean, obviously, I'm very curious to hear about what all of you think. Have you watched Top Gun before? Is this a movie that you watched when you were younger and then maybe you decided to watch it again later on? What is your take now after so many years of it? Have you never watched Top Gun? And if so, are you interested in watching it before the new movie comes out? Maybe you're not even interested in the new movie. Who knows, right? But I definitely want to hear your thoughts if you've watched this movie. But yeah, it was really very fun to revisit this movie, and I am planning to do more of these revisit episodes. So if you like what you see and you're new here, don't forget, hit that like button, subscribe. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you get notified of new episodes once they're uploaded. I will make these also available on the podcast platforms of your choice. Just look for the LOWKEY Geek channel there, and you can download this episode and others directly from there. And don't forget to leave a great rating too if it prompts you so to ever do so, because I would love to continue to grow this community and spread the word and spread the awareness of it there. So, but yeah, thank you for watching along. And if you got the need for speed, definitely watch Top Gun all over again and let me know your thoughts on it. But until the next time, stay cool, stay classy, stay safe. And I will catch you on the flip side. Peace.